Make the poor man's version of a beef Wellington using some ribeyes, and we're essentially doing mini ones instead of the big one that you typically use is the beef tenderloin. We're also going to whip up some pear turnovers, fry up some potatoes, saute up some spinach for just a really simple kind of dinner tonight for our small crew because we've got some kids at the Preds games and we're just all out and about tonight. So it's kind of nice to be home for a little bit. But let's start by getting our mushrooms chopped up for our kind of our beef Wellington as well as our garlic. Now for our mushrooms, you actually kind of want to mince them up fairly small so that you almost have like a mushroom salsa, just really, really fine. So I'm going to slice them all up and then we're going to chop them up fairly small. And I'm going to kind of go back through and kind of go over them and chop them up nice and small. And then we're going to saute these off with some butter, garlic, and then a little bit of red wine and thyme to make this nice little kind of like an onion paste, whatnot, that we're going to put between our like on our pastry that will wrap around our steaks. So we're going to kind of nice and fine. You could always put this in a food processor, but since I'm making just two kind of mini beef Wellingtons, it's just easy to do it with our knife here. And I'm just using good old portobello mushrooms, but cremini mushrooms are great for this as well.
You have a question? Did you have a good Thanksgiving?
We did have a great Thanksgiving. It was kind of crazy and chaotic, when any of the whole group, when we all get together, it's just loud and crazy and chaos. But it turned out well. The turkeys all turned out. I cooked the whole Thanksgiving dinner this year, so I was managed to get it all out on time with everything hot, so that's always a win. I smoked a turkey and I baked a turkey. I do have a little video that's coming of our little spread that I took at the very end, so I'll get that up soon. Kind of a quick through because again, it was just so fast paced while there because I made cinnamon rolls that day, and then as soon as I was essentially done with cinnamon rolls, I went on to making the whole spread and everything. So here we've got our lovely kind of finely minced up mushrooms. I'm going to move them to the side, and then we're going to do a little bit of garlic. That way I can have this garlic toasting in the butter, and that will add just a really great flavor to the steak as well. Because again, we're going to be putting this on our puff pastry that will be wrapping around the steaks. Now, typically for beef Wellington, you use a beef tenderloin. Beef tenderloin is like so expensive. And it's not always to find. Most grocery stores don't actually carry it. Now, Costco, you can typically get a beef tenderloin there or whatnot. But ribeyes work really well. A steak works really well as, like I say, the poor man's version of a beef Wellington. And we're going to do it, it's going to look a little different, but it's kind of the same end product at the end. So let's mince up our garlic here. There we go. And then I'm going to be cooking this on my little plate, my little burner in the back. So I'm going to put a little bit of butter back here so that we can kind of cook up our mushrooms. And since we have a good amount of mushrooms here, I'm going to do about 2 tablespoons of butter. We're going to let that melt, and then I'm going to add in our garlic and let that sizzle. I'm going to grab, because I didn't set one out, I have a piece of onion in here. I'm going to mince up to add in there as well so that we have some nice onion in there as well. So it'll be good to use it up. A shallot would be the best to use, but regular onions. I'm just going to have this small little bit of red onion that I'm going to kind of use up for it, which will give it a little bit of the sweetness that red onions have on here. And I just want a little bit of that flavor. So again, we're just going to mince it up nice and small as well. But shallots would be the best for this. So we're going to mince this nice and small on here to make our beef Wellingtons. We've got our ribeyes over here. We've kind of had them patted dry. We're going to season them up here with kind of a little dry rub, and we're going to sear them off in our pan. And then we're going to cook our potatoes in those kind of drippings left over from the steak. And once our butter kind of gets melted up in there, we'll add in our onions and our garlic and then our mushrooms. Okay, we've got that. So we've got our kind of our veggies ready for right here. And you can see, keep it small, nice and minced. That way you kind of have this really fine minced kind of paste that's going to go around it.
Yeah, question. How many people did you cook for this week?
So it was about 40 people, everyone kind of together for our Thanksgiving. So it was a pretty big crowd on there with lots of my siblings and my nieces and nephews and on there. So it was a large crowd. So I cooked 2 turkeys. We had 3 turkeys delivered, and then I made, think of a turkey roaster full of my homemade green bean casserole, which I use all fresh ingredients for, and I make my own like cream of mushroom soup, and I fry up my own onions for it, and I blanch the green beans. So I made that, sweet potatoes and parsnips, mashed potatoes, and gravy using the drippings from the turkey, from our baked turkey. I brined one of our turkeys. I brined the turkey that I smoked on our thing, which was delicious. It had a lot of great flavor. I'm gonna put a little bit of thyme in here as well on our steaks. I'm gonna flip these guys over. Wash my hands real quick, and we're gonna do the exact same on the other side. And then we always do peas and corn and rolls, a lot of like simple staples. I made my own cranberry sauce on there.
You did the cinnamon rolls.
Yes, and I made 2 huge sheet and a half, those big trays of cinnamon rolls. I do have, I think, a short out there of the cinnamon rolls, and they turned out really good this year. I actually, I always talk about how I like my electric oven over a gas oven, and my parents have a gas oven. And so I said this year, I'm baking the cinnamon rolls at my house, and then I'll bring them over because I know how it cooks here. And everyone's like, this is the best year they turned out. And I said, it's because I baked them at my house in my oven, so I knew exactly how they were going to turn out.
And how long did it take to cook all that?
I think I started at noon and 6 hours, and we ate at 6. So it was a long time, with lots of chatting and everything in between. Okay, I'm gonna put my onions in. We're gonna let them kind of sizzle for a minute, and then I will drop my garlic in, and then our mushrooms. I'm gonna grab a little tongs right now. Let that go. And we're gonna sear off our steaks here. I'm gonna do.
Yeah, the question, what happened to your hand?
I burned myself so many times on the, this is just one of 3 burns. So I told you, I don't cut myself on the cooking. It's burn, burn, and burn. It's when you are trying to fit so much stuff in one oven and you are layering it, and then you're reaching back in there because you've got to have so many trays, because my mom has like one oven underneath her stove, and then she has this like tiny oven that fits nothing, which is, it's a useless oven. It fits 1 tray. And so I'm trying to keep everything warm and cooked at the exact same time for 40 people is very difficult. So going in and out, and she has no oven mitts. No oven mitts whatsoever. She has like ones that she's knitted herself or crocheted that have little holes in it. So I told her, I said, next year you need to have oven mitts for me. So I think that's what she's getting for Christmas is oven mitts to match her kitchen decor. Because I don't know how much longer my body can handle it. But yes, this one actually, even though it looks the worst, that one didn't hurt. The one on the finger, oh, that one hurt so bad. But you gotta power through with a smile. Okay, we're gonna put our garlic in here. You know, it's funny, in my younger years, I always cut myself cooking. Like I got stitches once cutting chicken. But I haven't cut myself in a long time, but I tend to burn myself a lot, and that's because I'm just careless. I'm just in and out quick, you know, probably touching things I shouldn't, because I'm like, it's not that hot. It's hot. Okay, we've got our garlic in. We're gonna let that sizzle for like 30 seconds to a minute. We're gonna get our pan up nice and hot here. And we're gonna sear off our steaks. Now we're not cooking our steaks all the way through. You wanna sear them off on high heat so that you get this good sear on both sides of them, and then we'll take them off and we'll let them rest. And then we're gonna wrap them up in our pastry when it's time for that. Just making sure it gets nice. I'm gonna grab a little drop of water to test it. Perfect. Let me grab some tongs. And again, I'm gonna do this on about a 7 because I want a high sear on it. I don't wanna cook it too long because it's gonna cook in the oven. And I'm using just kind of a dry seasoning on my steaks here because I don't want them too wet because they'll make your pastry soggy. Let's add our mushrooms in over here. Give us a good stir. And that garlic smells fantastic. And this is our chopped up portobello mushrooms that we are going to add. And this is going to be on our beef Wellington that we're going to kind of spread on top of our puff pastry. And then we're also going to make little pear turnovers as like kind of a dessert with nice dinner. Let me give this a minute. We'll let this saute up, and then we're going to add a little bit of red wine in here. Now, white wine would be the best, but I just have red. So we're going to use a little bit of that to kind of make the base of it. And you kind of cook it until it all evaporates out, but you want a little bit of that flavor. Okay. And then I'm going to prep my potatoes that we're going to cook in the kind of the meat drippings afterwards to kind of add some that meat drippings will add a wonderful flavor to it.
Did you make any desserts for Thanksgiving?
So we have a tradition where my stepdad buys a bunch of pies from the Puffy Muffin, which is this local bakery here, and he gets them every single year. But I did make one pie. I made a gluten-free pumpkin pie using gluten-free ginger snaps for my sister-in-law because she's a gluten allergy. So that was the only dessert that I made for Thanksgiving. Now I made a cake for my sister's birthday, which was delicious and wonderful. And then I also made some snickerdoodles and other little treats here and there. Made some, blueberry muffins. But that we had so many pies kind of delivered because by the time Thanksgiving cooking them, there's not much energy left to make a whole bunch of pies for it because there's a lot of regular food to make.
And have you ever made a traditional beef Wellington?
I have made a traditional beef Wellington, and they are delicious. So it was actually the meal I made for my husband on our first date. First date at our house. It was our second date to go together, but it was the first time I had cooked him for him. So I made him a traditional beef Wellington because, I had to be all bougie and show off my skills. But I have made it, but this is a great way when you don't have like the nice beef tenderloin, which isn't always easy to find. This is what I call the poor man's version, which tastes very similar and is delicious. But it's ingredients you can just get at your local grocery store on there. Because while beef tenderloin is fabulous, it's like one of the most expensive cuts of beef you can get. And it's not easy to get like a small one. At Costco, you get this huge one, which would be, this is massive. But I know my daughter was asking for me to make like beef Wellington last week, and I was like, oh yeah, and then this time never happened. Let's see how these are. And then I'm just gonna kind of flip over and sear the fat vein off. That way you get it nice and crispy on it. So we're gonna sit and we're gonna let these rest on here. Again, we're not cooking them all the way through. You just want a kind of a nice high sear on both sides of them, so that they'll have that nice little kind of crust on it, because this is gonna cook up in the oven, so you don't wanna overcook it, because you want it to stay a nice kind of medium rare.
A question. So are you back to normal schedule?
For the most part, I will say starting next week when life goes back, I still have a bunch of family in town. So tomorrow I think we should start being about back on normal schedule. You know, just, we're getting there, almost there. Still a little chaos here. Okay, let's get a little bit of, this is a Pinot Noir, but again, a dry white wine would be the best. I'm just gonna put in about a fourth of a cup in here, just a little bit. And you're gonna cook it completely off, so you wanna keep cooking these mushrooms until all of that liquid is gone, but it's gonna add a great flavor to it. We're gonna add in a little bit of thyme. Fresh thyme would be amazing too for this, but I'm gonna add in about a teaspoon, because this is gonna be a really flavorful kind of a mushroom, kind of a chopped mushroom paste. And you're gonna have those onions, that garlic, just all that deliciousness in it. Let's get our potatoes here. So here we're gonna start kind of frying our potatoes up in our drippings from our steak, so they'll get a nice flavor from it. And then we'll work on making our kind of our beef Wellington here. So I'm gonna give these a nice little chop up here. So I just got 2 russet potatoes. We're just gonna do kind of a simple chop on it. I was deciding fried potatoes or mashed potatoes, but you know, we always have mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving, so I was like, fried potatoes it is. We've had a lot of, when our family gets together, it's kind of easier to just cater some of the meals. So we had like Greek catered, and then there's this like local food place called Monell's here. It's like a meat and 3, a very southern thing. So we had that one night kind of catered, and all my nights are blending together. I feel like we had one other meal, not catered, but it is just kind of nice. You know, now I'm like sitting here, I'm like, I'm ready to get back to normal. Especially because Thanksgiving is so late this year that it's like, oh, got a plan for Christmas. Get all, you know, I'm not a big, I don't do a lot of Black Friday shopping. And I've only gone out like 2 years before on Black Friday, so I don't ever do that. But I look for the good cyber deals. That's where you get me. You know, try to get the kids shopping and figure out. But the tricky part is one of my kids' birthday is just, you know, like a week or so before Christmas. So you're like, you got to get him enough for his birthday and enough for Christmas. But then I'm like, oh, we've got one big present. Now we've got to figure out what to get him for Christmas. That's hard. I feel for those December birthdays. Yeah. I'm going to turn it down to about a 4. I've got a little bit of oil in here. And you know what, before I do that, I want to add a little bit of garlic in. Let me give my mushrooms. Almost all of that liquid is nice and off. Okay. Let's get our garlic, well actually let's wait on that. Let's get our steaks wrapped up here so that we can get our beef Wellington in the oven, and then we can work on our potatoes. And then we're gonna do pear turnovers because I've got some pears that are ready. So we're only gonna use 1 sheet of the puff pastry for these 2 Wellingtons, and the other one will be for our turnovers. Now, like when I did my turnovers before, don't just use a really thick, don't just wrap it up like this because it will be too thick for your Wellington, and then you're gonna have the issue where it like the pastry doesn't crisp up, it just remains kind of doughy. So we're gonna roll it out thinner so that it crisps up nicely. It's also gonna allow it to kind of cook up a little bit faster in it on here. Let's give this a little bit of a stir here. I'm gonna turn off my mushrooms since we're just right here. I'm gonna turn off my potatoes since we're not there yet. Those look fantastic. Okay, let's roll this guy out. I know the first time I ever made beef Wellington, like back in high school, I didn't roll out my puff pastry, and it makes a big difference. So it is something you definitely need to do.
You have a question? Do the kids eat mushrooms?
They do. They, especially when they're minced up like this, the kids won't really know it, but one of my kids absolutely loves mushrooms like me. Because they're so delicious. But when they're like this, you don't even really notice them because they are kind of like a paste. So that just adds a lot of delicious flavor. Okay, I'm gonna try to see exactly, I'm gonna cut them down in the middle halfway like this. And then, let me grab my spoon here. And I think I'm gonna build them on my thing, and then we'll build one, and then we'll do it because once we put the meat and stuff inside, it's gonna be kind of hard to move. So we'll build it on here, and because you just don't want it to fall apart once you do it. So I'm gonna take about half of my little mushroom paste here. We're gonna kind of sprinkle it around. All on here. There we go. I think one more spoonful will get it. And then just kind of bring it all around so that when we kind of fold it up over, we'll have it a little bit every which way. Beautiful. And then I like to do, now you can add a lot of different ingredients. Some people use prosciutto, some people put spinach, some people put cheese. I'm gonna put a little bit of cheese in it because I like it. This is a Gruyere and Swiss cheese blend. You're gonna wanna use one of your kind of your creamier type cheeses like this that will melt well. You don't wanna go too rich. And we're gonna put it in here in the middle like this. You're gonna kind of wanna fold this guy over first, and then so we'll have that. We've got our first one made and kind of tucked under. You know what, that one actually moved fairly well, so do this one on here. parchment paper just creates kind of a really nice kind of base for it. So we're gonna add this guy on. Put all of our little diced up mushrooms. A lot of times I will also saute up spinach and put spinach in here as well. There's a lot of different things you can add in here. There we go. So we've got our kind of our mushroom paste here. And then we're gonna add in a little bit of our Swiss and Gruyere cheese. Not too much, because again, you don't want it to go too crazy. We've got our steak. This is our ribeye steak that we seared up. This one's a little bit wider, but we should be able to make it work. So we're gonna do the sides first because it will hold together a lot better with the sides. And then before we pop these in the oven, I do have my oven preheated to 425. We're gonna add in 1 egg. We're gonna brush it with an egg. So I'm going to whisk this up. And this is gonna give it a nice shiny coat. So I've got our egg here. We're gonna add in about 1.5 teaspoons of water. So I'm just gonna add a slight splash of water. And this is going to give it a nice shine to the top of our thing. And we're going to cook this at 425 for about 25 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes on here. And that's going to cook our steak to about a perfect medium rare. It has a nice insulator with the pastry, so it's not going to cook as fast as if you were to put it in there, a steak on its own, because the pastry does act as a nice kind of insulator on here. So we're going to kind of coat it all the way like this, and then once we have this, we're just going to make a nice little slit on the top here, so that some steam can escape out, because if you don't do that, then it will kind of puff up and pop out. And this is kind of our beautiful poor man's beef Wellington. So we've got our 2 little slits. Let's go pop this in the oven. And we're gonna let this cook at 425 for about 20 to 25 minutes. I'm gonna put it at 20, and then we'll kind of watch it for that last one. Kind of get its nice little color into it. So I'm going to start it like that, and then when we pop our pear turnovers in there in a few minutes, we will turn it to the side. Okay, let's get our potatoes going, our pears going, and we can work on our pear turnovers. So I'm going to turn on my oil right here. We're going to mince up a few things of garlic. And get our potatoes sautéing. Pears are pretty soft, so we don't need to cook them very long before we put them in our turnover base for it. And I'm just going to spice them really simple with brown sugar, a little bit of cinnamon, and a splash of vanilla, just for this nice kind of sweet flavor to it, but nothing too overpowering. This garlic in. We'll let it start to saute up for just a second, and then we'll toss these potatoes in. We give my hands a quick rinse, because I don't want any garlic flavor on my things. And I'm done with this. I'm going to move this over here. And then last we'll do is our spinach, because spinach, as you know, takes absolutely no time to cook up. Let me grab a little knife here, and we're just going to peel our pears, slice them, and pop them in our pan just to cook up a little bit. You want fairly ripe pears. You don't want them to be super firm or they're not going to cook up nicely. So I typically, when they've gotten, these are Bartlett pears, when they're, you know, almost a yellow with little brown spots on it, that's pretty much anywhere where they've bumped. Those are going to be perfect for things. They're going to be a little soft to touch, but not mushy. When they're bright green, they're typically underripe, which means they're going to be rock hard. They won't be as sweet. They don't get tender enough for your, you know, baked goods. Now, if you want to, you could definitely keep on your skin, but I like the skin off. I just think it gives a nicer finished product. Okay. Our garlic's nice and crispy here. So we're going to toss in our potatoes. We're going to coat them up with kind of our residual oil and drippings from our steak. And the garlic smells fantastic. And then I'm going to get my lid out here, and we're going to kind of steam cook the potatoes. That's going to allow them to cook up a little bit faster and soften up so they'll get crispy but also tender all the way through. That way it doesn't take like 30 plus minutes to cook these potatoes. But I'm going to kind of flatten them out, and then at the very end we'll add a little bit. We might add a splash of butter, and then we'll season them up, but not until the end or those spices will dry on it. So let me grab my lid here. And let's finish up these pears. But again, if you don't mind the skins, you don't have to peel them on them. Their skins are much more tender than an apple. So they're not as like intrusive when you're eating them in a baked good. Very, you know, more delicate. Now, if you're going to use like an Asian pear, then that is a skin you're going to want to peel because that is more of like a sandpaper texture. There we go. But you see how while they may look all bumped up and kind of ugly on the outside, they're perfect in the inside, and they're going to have that perfect sweetness to it. So the pretty green in pears are typically underripe, and so you just need them to sit on your counter for a little bit. And then I pop them in the fridge to kind of prevent them ripening too fast. Turn my potatoes down to about a 5. Because I don't want them to crisp up too much in there. And then, because pears are more tender than apples, we'll cook these for about, you know, a minute or 2. They don't need to cook quite as long as an apple to get tender, which is one thing that's nice. You could even just toss them with the sugar and spices and put them in there, but I do like to give them just a little bit of a cook up. Takes out some of their extra liquid so you don't get too soggy of a turnover. Okay, I'm going to turn on my back burner to about a 6 just to start them kind of sweating out some of their juices. And then we'll add in our brown sugar. Also, pears are sweeter than apples, so you don't need quite as much sugar to get that sweetness, which is nice. And then got one more here because they do kind of, they're very juicy, so they definitely shrink away. And then we are going to roll out our puff pastry, fill them up with our deliciousness, and I'm going to make 4 with this because the second sheet of my puff pastry makes 4 turnovers. So if you wanted to do a full one, it would make 8 turnovers. And I will say turnovers are one of those things that are always a crowd pleaser, but they're really pretty easy to make.
You have a question. How long do you leave your pears out to ripen them?
It's really going to be based on how they look and feel. So I typically look till they have kind of a little bit of a soft touch to them where they have a little give when you give them. And they go kind of from that bright green to that more of that yellowish on there. And if they have any nicks, those nicks turn a little brown. So it's more of a feel. Sometimes you go to the store and your pears are very underripe. They're like rock hard. And they might take a week or so to get to that point. Sometimes they just need a day or two. So it really depends on your pears. It's really hard to say because, you know, it just depends on what stage you bought them at the grocery store. And some stores, it's like they picked them super early. Okay. We're gonna put in just about a half a cup of brown sugar. I'm going to put a little bit more since I didn't pack it down. Again, you don't need as much because pears are a little bit sweeter than apples. We're going to do our first flip of our potatoes. Just scrape under there, get off any of those crispy bits. We're going to flip them over. There we go. Beautiful. Now we're going to put our lid back on. You can see the potatoes are starting to get translucent now. We're going to add, I want to say about a teaspoon of cinnamon. I almost grabbed the thyme to put in there. That would be weird. And then about a half a teaspoon of vanilla. This really mellows out the flavors, and I think it just works really well. We're going to add a pinch of salt. And we're going to have a little pat of butter here. About a teaspoon. Yeah, I'll do a little more. Now I'm going to stir this up. Let me get a nice metal spoon, that way it'll be easier. And then I'm going to start rolling out my puff pastry so that we can get these guys in the oven cooking for this. But they smell wonderful.
That's an interesting question. What's the worst cooking mistake you've ever made?
Well, when I was a kid, I once missed, this is, I told this before, but when I was a kid, my sister and I were making chocolate chip cookies, and we misread the amount of vanilla, and we read, for some reason, it was like half a tablespoon, but we read it as a half a cup of vanilla, and that was really bad. Those were the worst cookies ever. Now, this one's kind of funny because this is recently. I just took for granted that the temperature on my parents' pizza oven was in Fahrenheit and not Celsius. And so for about a year, I was using it, and every time I burnt the first thing I made, and I had to be like super fast in it. So I was like cooking things at like, 600 degrees Celsius, which is like 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And it was pretty interesting on there. Yeah, that one, I burnt a lot of food over the last kind of year. And then my husband pointed out to me that the big numbers in red was actually Celsius because it is an Italian pizza oven. Makes sense that it would be in Celsius and not Fahrenheit. But I just didn't even think that far ahead. I just assumed the little ones were Celsius. So, I mean, we still had lots of edible ones, but there was a lot of burnt food. And it was always the first one until I kind of like magically knew how to leave the door open wide enough of the pizza oven to prevent it from burning. I'm much more consistent and it's much better now. That's a big difference on there. And then I will say one time, I was doing a Swedish recipe and I mixed up the deciliters with some measurement thing. And that didn't turn out because it was a metric system and we had these little measurement cups and yeah, it was fun times. Okay, I'm gonna cut this into 4 squares. There we go. And then we will build these guys and brush them with some delicious egg wash and pop them in the oven.
Mary Ann sent you a gift.
Thank you, Marianne. We appreciate that. Here we've got kind of this nice sauce forming for our pears. I'm going to get my baking sheet over here. And I'll do one at a time and then we can kind of transfer them over. Turn that down just a smidge. And we'll get these in here and then we will start up. So I'm going to turn this guy off. I'll put our pears here. Try not to get too much of that sauce because again, you don't want it to be super soggy. And you could always put a little bit of cornstarch in there if you wanted to thicken it up. And then you're gonna just fold it over. And then I'm gonna pull this to the side to make our edges and then I can slide it right back over there.
Oh, you have a question. Is there discard in your dough?
This is just a pre-bought pastry dough for puff pastry because as much as I love homemade puff pastry is delicious, it is a lot of work. And tonight is an easy, kid-free night for us, so no extra work on there. But when I do a lot of my other baking, I do use a lot of discards and stuff for it. But this is just that good old Pepperidge Farm, which I will say it gets you pretty close to homemade. You know, the amount of work it takes to make homemade puff pastry, this is a great substitute. And you know, I'm always typically big for the homemade, but there are times where I'm like, is it worth the effort? And this is one of those ones where I'm like, this is a good go-to.
Do you have a video of homemade puff pastry?
You know, I haven't done it in a while, so I might have to actually do a video. I keep saying I want to make my Danish pastries and I make my puff pastry for that. So maybe over winter break, I might actually get that up and going because it is so good. Let's flip my potatoes here. Oh, beautiful. We're getting our nice crispy edges on them. Gorgeous. These are about 10 minutes out from being done. Beautiful. Okay. Let's get our puff pastries in the oven so we can finish up. Okay. I'm always like, gotta remember how to put them each on. So I'll spoon these guys in. Now I'm doing it with pears, but you can definitely use apples. Really like blueberries. You can make a little blueberry compote in here. Strawberries. So let's seal up the sides here. And this is just to prevent a little bit of that oozing out and gives you that, you know, pretty crimped look to it. Got one more. I'm always like, how? Let me figure out exactly how I'm gonna fold it here. There we go.
Has your elf arrived yet?
Not yet, but he's got to make an appearance as soon as. So over Thanksgiving, my kids all go over to my parents' house for like the whole week because all of their cousins are there. So it's been kind of quiet and calm here when we get home at like midnight. But Evie will be expecting it the soon as she comes back. She'd been petitioning for it to come early, and I was like, if you maybe write a letter to Santa, but she didn't, so I was thankful because there's a lot of work in that. And I think Teddy is gonna be really interested into it this year. We'll see if Jack understands it. I think he's still a little bit young. Okay, we slide these guys out. Let's brush them with the egg wash. That's again gonna give them a nice shine to it. We'll peek in on our beef Wellington that we have cooking, and see if they need a few extra minutes or if they're getting close to it. We're gonna get these guys in here. And these need about, I wanna say like 15 minutes max, sometimes a little less on here. We make our little slits so again they don't puff up too much. Brush a little, forgot one little spot right here. There we go. We're gonna pop this in here. Then we're gonna work on our spinach and everything. Let me grab our oven mitt here. Our puff pastry are looking pretty fantastic here. Look how beautiful on our beef Wellington. I'm gonna slide it down and have it underneath for it, but look how just gorgeous this is. It's got a nice thing. I'm gonna slide it underneath and I'm gonna put this one on top. And I'm going to, we'll let that, I'm gonna put maybe 2 more minutes on that one because I want it a little bit more golden around the edges. Then we'll take that out. Our puff pastry, we'll add a little bit more time on there when it's on there. It needs about between around 14 minutes to cook up for our puff pastry for the turnovers because you're waiting for it, but we rolled it pretty thin so it cooks pretty quickly. We're gonna finish our potatoes with the lid off here, and then we're gonna work on our creamed spinach here in just a second. I'm gonna slide this guy over here. So, we're gonna do, this is one of my favorite ways to do spinach. We're gonna use a little bit of garlic. We're gonna mince it up. And then we're gonna kind of saute the garlic and a little bit of butter, and then we're gonna add in our spinach little by little until it's nice and sauteed up. Then we'll add a little bit of garlic salt, and we'll finish off with some Parmesan cheese. Now, spinach is one of the last things you want to cook because it takes hardly any time. So don't cook that first. Always wait till the very end because it is very quick going. And then we are going to season our potatoes here in just a second as well. So look, we've got these just wonderful crispy edges on there. And again, we cook these in our lovely steak dripping, so we should have some of the lovely flavors as well. Okay. Got this nice. And then we're gonna do, I think my butter's over here, my spinach in the butter because the butter is where it comes from. It's nice. So we're gonna put in about 1.5 tablespoons of butter here. I just find that olive oil, I like to use olive oil in most of my cooking, but it doesn't give the spinach the right flavor on here. So you really need to use the butter. And grab a pair of tongs. We'll give this a good little swirl around, kind of melt it out. And we'll add in our garlic. And I have it over, right now I'm going to kind of heat it up over about a 5. And as once we get a good coat of the melted butter in, then we can add in the garlic. Don't just throw your garlic on your skillet until you have a good layer of melted butter, because garlic is pretty like delicate in that it will burn really easy on like a dry skillet. We're going to add in our garlic here so it can start to saute. And I'm doing a good amount of garlic because that's the flavors really what make the spinach shine. And if you have pine nuts, that's also something that's really delicious for this as well. Okay. Now for our potatoes, I'm kind of sticking in the flavors that our steak has, or that the steak we seasoned up inside our our beef Wellington. So I'm gonna use some thyme. We're gonna sprinkle, and I'm gonna not mix them in yet because I want them to kind of steam up first. So we're gonna do about, a half a teaspoon of dried thyme. We're gonna shake a little bit of garlic salt over the top of this, about 3/4 of a teaspoon. And a couple good shakes of black pepper. And then we're just gonna let it steam up here.
You have a question. Could you use pine nuts instead of garlic, or could you use both?
I would use both. So pine nuts are what I add in there to add a little extra texture to it. It gives you a little crunch to the spinach, so that it's not there. I'm gonna take my beef Wellington out here, my Coleman's beef Wellington. You can see we've got this beautiful crust on it. And then I'm gonna put my timer here on here for another 8 minutes. And that should get us to here. We're gonna let it sit. But you can see we've just got these beautiful individual Wellingtons.
Do you ever make stuffed artichokes?
I haven't worked with artichokes in a really long time. So I used to only ever really just boil them and have them with butter. So I haven't actually made a stuff. I've eaten plenty of stuffed artichokes, but I've never made one. And you know what? I feel like artichokes had this big moment in the early 2000s where everybody was eating them. And then I just don't see them anymore. I rarely never see them at my grocery store, so they don't even pop in my mind. So now you made me think about artichokes and wanting to do them. So I might have to adventure into that, because that was something I always made all the time, was just you boil them and then you dip their leaves in this lovely like garlic herb butter. Okay. We've got our garlic seared off. I'm going to pop it there so that it doesn't get too crispy before I add in my spinach. We're going to add in our first layer of spinach. There we go. I'm going to toss it and kind of coat it up. We're going to add our spinach little by little. And again, keep your temperature down low so that you don't cook your spinach too fast. And then we'll add slowly by slowly so that you'll still have a good amount of your texture on it. And then I'm going to grab my Parmesan cheese and my cream out of the fridge, because I like to do a little cream spinach with Parmesan in it. I'm like sitting here and I'm like, oh, I've got to do grocery shopping. There's so many things where it comes to the like, about to be the week after Thanksgiving, and my parents' house is like full of leftovers right now, and it's always like refashioning. So I always tell my brother-in-law every year, it's his tradition, he takes the 5 carcasses from the turkeys and he makes this stock that he cooks overnight in this giant stock pot. So he has it in there with onions and carrots and garlic, and he like breaks down all of it, so all 5 fit in this huge stock pot, and he makes this really thick base that he uses. And he made turkey olive king today that we had at lunch using our leftovers, like the leftover corn and the peas and everything from Thanksgiving, because we really like to refashion our leftovers into a completely different meal. Let's get these guys in here. Okay. Take one and go there. We're gonna let that saute for a second. Let's get our spices now that they've had a minute to steam up. I always like to let them hydrate. You can see they're not as dry and dark. We're gonna mix them in. This just allows them so that they're not crunchy on your potatoes, but really they kind of blend in well. These are going to be fabulous. I was thinking about adding a little bit of butter in them, but they look like they've got the perfect amount of crispness that we don't need to add any of that in here at all. Get these guys nice and finished up. Okay. Now we're gonna add a little bit of our cream and a little bit of garlic salt, and then we'll finish off with a little bit of Parmesan. Now don't go crazy with the cream. You don't want it to be drenched in cream. I just like enough to kind of give it a creamy flavor and kind of coat it. So I put in about a tablespoon of cream. We'll do our shake over of garlic salt. And then we're gonna kind of coat it in here. And I find just don't go crazy with the cream. It doesn't need to be drenched. I feel like so much creamed kale, cream spinach is very thick. A little goes a long way of adding that rich flavor, but you don't need to have it completely drenched. Here. And then you kind of have it sit there. Actually, let me get a little piece, taste it, see if I need to add any more salt. And okay, perfect. We're going to sprinkle our Parmesan cheese over the top of it, and you're going to let it steam heat for a second. That way it gets nice and melted. And it kind of creates this lovely cheesy layer. We're going to taste our potatoes, see if we need to add anything else to it. And then we'll be ready to about plate up and grab our turnovers out of the oven. Okay, where's my little fork? Let's grab our potato here. I'm going to add a pinch more garlic and or a little bit more thyme. Pop that in here, and then let's start getting set up for ready to serve up here. Let's mix this in. But again, when you're frying your potatoes, just don't add your spices until the very end, because they'll stick onto your plate or your thing and they're more likely to burn. Okay. Get ready to serve up here. We've got about 1 minute left on our desserts, so we might serve up and then we'll go over there and grab them out when they're ready. Slide this over here. See if I can get that. And let's turn these guys off. And now we'll give our Parmesan a mix in. Now that it's melted, you can kind of see the cheese is stretching in there. Beautiful. Okay, I think let's go grab, since it looks like we have about 30 seconds left, let's go grab our turnovers out, and then we can plate up our dinner and dessert. So I've got our pear turnovers in here, which is a great way to kind of use both of our puff pastries for it. But look at our beautiful, gorgeous pear turnovers. You see that nice kind of golden brown shine on there is from that egg wash. The same thing on our beef Wellingtons. Gives it that nice kind of finish to it. Okay, let's get that off. And let's serve up everything. But again, we have our pears that we spiced with cinnamon and brown sugar and a splash of vanilla on there, and then our puff pastry. Okay, let's serve this guy up. This tonight for dinner, we are having our poor man's beef Wellington. We have our ribeye steak. We made a lovely mushroom kind of paste that we put on our puff pastry. We seared off our steak with thyme, garlic, and then wrapped it up and baked it in the oven at 425 until it was golden brown. We're serving it up with some creamy garlic, Parmesan spinach, and our thyme and black pepper and garlic fried potatoes that we fried in the drippings from our steak so that it has just this lovely flavor. And then for dessert, we will have our homemade pear turnovers. We sliced up 3 pears, seasoned them with cinnamon, vanilla, and brown sugar, put them inside our puff pastry, sealed them off, brushed them with an egg wash, and baked for about 14 minutes at 425 for the perfect dessert with our dinner. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page, so if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page, search for what we made, and you can watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets. I've got my baking sheets, my Hex-Clad pans, my All-Clad, my knives, all the different cookware and bakeware I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.